Welcome back to the Garden State Law Podcast. I'm your host, Tim Lau. Joining me today is employment law attorney DanaLynn Colao. DanaLynn, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Tim. I'm happy to be here.
So today, DanaLynn and I will be discussing New Jersey's new pay transparency law, which will impact most employers in 2025. But before we do that, DanaLynn, maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself and your practice.
Sure. I've been practicing law now for over 25 years, and I primarily practice in the area of employment and labor. In addition to litigating cases, I spend a considerable amount of time counseling my clients, helping them prepare policies and agreements, and I also conduct internal investigations.
Great. So let's start back from the beginning regarding this pay transparency law. In November of 2024, Governor Phil Murphy signed into law the new pay transparency law. Tell us a little bit about what's in this bill and how we expect it to impact employers.
Sure. The New Jersey pay transparency law requires employers to modify the information that they are including in job postings and how they communicate vacancies to their existing employees. The new law requires covered employers to make sure that they include salary ranges in job postings, as well as information regarding benefits that may be available to the new hire, as well as requiring employers to take some time to post opportunities for promotions to their existing employees in the affected departments. And the new law defines promotion as a change in job title as well as an increase in compensation.
Okay, so New Jersey is the home of many employers, but oftentimes not necessarily headquartered here, but have a satellite office in New Jersey. Does a satellite office or a smaller office or a subsidiary have the same law applied as it would elsewhere?
Yes. So covered employers are defined under the Act as an employer with 10 or more employees that either does business in New Jersey, has employees in New Jersey, or solicits applicants for positions of employment from the state of New Jersey.
Okay, so I guess I already know the next question, but someone working 100% remote, even if they're the only employee in the state, this applies to them as well.
Absolutely. Again, it applies to employers that accept applications from individuals in New Jersey and employs individuals in New Jersey. And it also just, for reference, applies to referral agencies and employment agencies.
Okay. So I guess the question on everybody's mind is, when is this going to go into effect? Because it's 2025. We're in April. I'm assuming it's going to happen soon.
Yes, it's going to take effect on June 1st.
Okay, so if we have a couple of months, we're 2 months out. What are some of the recommendations you would make for employers to prepare and get ready for this law and that goes into effect in June?
Sure. There's a couple of things I would recommend. First, I would recommend reviewing and revising their current practices for posting for positions as well as promotional opportunities at their company. I'd also recommend that employers take the time to make sure that they actually have a practice for notifying employees about promotional opportunities. It's been my experience that is not something that every employer has. I'd also recommend establishing pay ranges for positions, making sure that there's agreement across the board as to how employees within your organization should be compensated for similarly situated positions, as well as drafting a narrative of your benefit plans so that information is readily available to automatically be put into those job postings come June 1st. In addition, it would also be a good idea to do a pay equity audit just to ensure that you are already compensating your employees in an equitable manner in compliance with both state and federal law. And then lastly, I would recommend that you provide some training to your supervisors on the requirements of the new law. So any supervisor that's involved in the hiring process should be educated about these new requirements.
Great. So New Jersey, are we one of the first to do this? I know we often take our cue from our neighbors across the Hudson in New York. Are many states doing this, or are we one of the first of its kind?
No, there are several other states that already have these laws on the books. I'd say approximately 13. Illinois, Massachusetts, Vermont are just a few, but we're certainly not the first.
Okay, and how about exemptions? Any employers exempt to this, or is this pretty uniform across the board?
It's pretty uniform. Like I said earlier, it applies to anyone that has at least 10 or more employees. And the only exceptions really that are set forth right now in the new law is when there's an emergent situation and a company or an organization needs to make a promotional decision, they may do so as long as there's an emergent situation that's arisen that prevents them from complying. In addition, there is some language in the new law that enables temporary help service firms and consulting firms to avoid putting in any details like this in any job postings where they're just looking for prospective candidates to fill prospective positions. However, when they are posting for positions that they're specifically looking to fill for an end user, they do need to comply with the law.
Okay, so speaking of compliance, what happens if an employer fails to comply?
So right now, there's no private right of action under the law, which means that an individual cannot sue a company or an organization for violating the statute. However, there are monetary fines. So there's a fine of $300 for the first violation and a fine of $600 for every subsequent violation.
Yeah. So as a wrap up, what are some of the main takeaways that you'd recommend if someone's listening to this podcast? If there's something that they're going to take away and there's something that they're going to remember, what are the main takeaways for our employers?
Sure. I would really recommend having a review of your written salary guidelines, making sure that there are specific position descriptions for each position, as well as narrative descriptions for your benefit plans. And to the extent you haven't already done so, that pay equity audit, making sure that you are currently compensating your employees in an equitable manner and consistent with the laws. One concern that employers should keep in the back of their mind is that with this transparency comes the risk of potential liability. So if in fact they are not paying their employees in an equitable manner, this will soon become public knowledge through the job postings and the promotional opportunities being promoted within the organization, and therefore there could be a risk of liability, not just under this new law, but also the laws that prohibit discriminatory practices.
Got it. All right. Well, very interesting. Thank you very much, DanaLynn, for joining us. If anybody has any questions for DanaLynn, you can contact her at 973-645-4837 or dcolao at Saiber.com. That's DCOLAO at Saiber.com. DanaLynn, thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube and podcast channel, and we'll talk to you next time.